Tape Deck Media.
Step right up. Listen to the Awful Service Podcast. It's future radio on your computer phone. You've heard of Hanna-Barbera, Laurel and Hardy, Sears and Roebuck, now Doyle and Cocazello. Are you a bean counter at your boring job? Listen to the Awful Service Podcast. We've got segments, we've got guests, we've got Karens.
The Awful Service Podcast, available where all podcasts are streamed. Brought to you by Tape Deck Media.
Welcome back, Phantom Files, to the Phantom Files. Is it clear that when I refer to you as the Phantom Files, I mean it isn't like P-H-I-L-E-S? Okay, great. Just checking. So welcome, Phantom Files, to Volume 5 of the Phantom Files. I am, as always, your creepy chronicle curator, Taylor Ruddle. And I'm back again much sooner than expected, with 5 more chilling tales for you to enjoy. Do you like the new logo and the cover art? I sure do, and I hope you do too. I've got a lot to get through this week, so let's not waste any time, and let's just get straight into the stories. Now, this volume of the Phantom Files contains a lot more arguably humorous stories than my last few, but I like to think they're still creepy and cozy in their own ways. So the first one I've got for you tonight is actually taken from an interview that I did with David from the One Nothing podcast and from Down the Rabbit Hole on Instagram. This is a fairly short one, so I don't need to give much of an introduction, but we'll call this story The Devil Went Out to Dinner.
I was married at the time, so there's that, right? So I'm not married anymore. I'm divorced. But this is going back to 2004, 2005. I was with my ex-wife. We were at having dinner at her favorite restaurant, and it's an elegant restaurant, right? It's an elegant Mexican restaurant in San Antonio. And we're having dinner indoors, and the place is kind of packed, right? I'm enjoying what I'm having. I can't even remember what it was, but there were like 3 tables away in my eye line was a table of a man and a woman and their son, who must have been between 10 and 13 years old. And, I'm just having a good time with my ex-wife. We're just talking, and then I catch in my eye line this young man looking at me. Right, he's just looking at me at first, and I'm like, okay, he's just no big deal, right? He's never seen a Hispanic, apparently. I don't know what's going on. Okay, whatever, yes, he was white, and so he's looking at me, and he starts to look startled. He's scared, right? And I can see this. I'm like, oh shit, what's happening here? I don't know what's going on. Then I hear him say something, but it's so loud in the restaurant. There's so many people chattering and all this noise, right? But he's saying something, and his parents are like gesturing to him, like, no, it's okay. Then he starts to say it again, and it seems like it's getting louder because I can almost hear what he's saying. And he starts to point directly at me, right? And I'm like, oh shit. Then he's getting scared. You can see him like frightened. And then I could hear what he was actually saying. He kept saying over and over again, it's the devil! It's the devil! And he started getting louder and louder. And I swear to you, when it got to the point where everyone could hear him, it got quiet in that restaurant. It got real quiet. His daddy's like fumbling through his wallet, trying to get money out to throw it on the table so they can get the hell out of there, right? And this whole time, and the wife is picking him up, like telling him to come. He's still screaming, "It's the devil! It's the devil! He's right there!" And I'm like, dude, to me it was funny, man. I was like, this kid thinks I'm the devil, man. I don't know what's going on. So finally he's gone, and you can still hear him as he's going out. and I'm like, wow. I look at my ex-wife, and I'm like, what the hell was that? She's like, I don't know. You're the devil, apparently. She said, and I'm like laughing to myself. And then I notice that there's no noise in the restaurant. And when I look around, everyone is looking at me in this weird accusatory way, like I did something to that kid, or possibly I was the devil at that moment.
And we are back. Did you enjoy that story? I sure did. Quite a funny way to kick us off, I think. As to whether or not David himself is actually the devil, well, he doesn't call himself the Duke of Darkness for nothing. I've got another story from David coming up later on in the show, but as for right now, I've got another story from Tracy Royce of the Quantum Foundation Paranormal Investigation Team. If you've listened to all of the Phantom Files volumes so far, then Tracy will be no stranger to you. And this is another interesting story she told me about possibly witnessing what I understand is known as a time slip. So without any further ado, let's get straight into the story.
I got one more. It's not, I haven't had any experiences where I've said I'm scared or I'm terrified. I've just had experiences where it's weird, okay? I can't explain it, and it's just weird. And probably with a lot of them, I don't think much of it at the time. It's not until after the fact that something comes to light and I go, holy shit, you know? And so anyway, this is one of those holy shit times. We went to see a particular hotel, knowing fair well the hotel was haunted. And I had a very, very well-known author who was a dear friend of mine who I had flown over from the UK to hold a series of workshops and lectures throughout New Zealand. And being that way inclined, I was told by her partner, who was also that way inclined and an author, not to tell her that the place that we were going to have a look at was haunted, or she would refuse to enter the property, just because she gets bombarded, okay? And she is a writer in her genre, as well. So we went to this hotel, and she walks up to the door, and she lifts her foot up to step across the threshold, and she stops dead with her foot in midair, and she goes, I'm not going in here. And her partner goes, well, why? And she goes, I'm not going, this place has got, I'm not going in here. This place is haunted. This place is haunted, isn't it? Is this place haunted? And I just looked at him and I just looked away and walked away with a grin on my face. Anyway, she goes, no, I'll go stay outside and have a cigarette. Thanks, I'm not. No. You guys go and have a look around. I'm all good. So anyway, we did. We had a look around. Her husband was talking to the receptionist because the receptionist was from Wales. So he was yakking to her and saying, how long you been in New Zealand and blah, 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 and finding out all about what she's doing over here and all the rest of it. And me and my partner were just having a look around at we were just soaking up the ambience of this historical building and looking at the paintings and the beautiful chandelier and things like that. Anyway, I looked through to the dining room and I saw this waiter walking around, and he was dressed in black pants and he had the white breasted jacket on, right? And he had a silver tray and he had a glove on his hand and he had a silver tray up like this, and he had white tails, short tails, not long tails, halfway down the back of his legs, I suppose. So I suppose they were long tails, but white tails on his jacket, on his white jacket as well. And he was whipping around the restaurant at lightning speed, and I thought, now there's a bloody good waiter. And then I took another look and I thought, why is he carrying on like that? He's not even bloody busy. Oh, well, he must love his job. That I remember thinking that clear as a bell. Anyway, didn't think anything of it, yakking to the people on reception, yakking to my friend's partner, and then we decided to leave. So we go outside, and I said, why didn't you come in? And she said, that place is haunted, isn't it? And I said, yeah, that's why we brought it. That's why we brought you out here. And she's like, yeah, no, I don't know. No. They tend to come home with me, and I'd like, no. So we had a cigarette outside, and we were just yakking, and then we jumped in the car and we left, never thought anything of it. Years later, it was coming up to my 40th birthday party. And I came up with hiring this whole hotel out, because I knew it was incredibly haunted. And I said, I'm going to hire out the whole hotel and we're going to have a ghost hunt. And I'm going to invite all my friends and I'm going to charge them for the room, but let's put on a band because my birthday was on New Year's Eve. So let's put on a band in the restaurant and everything, in the function room, and everyone can come and stay the night, and we can have a really good party, and no one has to drink and drive. And it's in a haunted bloody hotel where there's haunted rooms and stuff, so that'll be really cool. And then I got given the option, yeah, we can do that. Yep, let's go out, and you set it up, and we'll go out and have a discussion with them. So that's what I did. I set up a meeting with them, and I went out, explained to them what I wanted to do, and had a meeting with them, got shown around the whole hotel from top to bottom, all the haunted rooms, but not told which ones, which was interesting, because the ones that I felt creeped out in, and I said, yeah, I don't like this room, I want out, thank you, please, bye-bye, was supposedly the rooms that were haunted. Anyway, so we went down into the bar and we sat down and we were talking to the caretaker, because he was the guy who was showing me around, and he had been a caretaker there for a number of years. I can't remember exactly how long. Anyway, he left us to have a look around on our own after we looked at the room. So we wandered round the outside of the hotel and the inside of the hotel. And we went and we sat in the dining room. And I just got a funny feeling about the dining room, right? And then we walked back out. And I remember saying to Craig, hang on a minute, they've done renovations since we were here with A and B, haven't they? And he goes, where? And I said, in reception, look. And he goes, oh shit, they have too. So I turned around to the manager and I said, oh, when did you do the renovations? And he goes, what renovations? And I said, the renovations in reception. And he goes, we haven't done any renovations. And I said, yeah, you have. That wall wasn't there. That was all like a glass, like those square glass bubble things that they put together. That was all. And he goes, no, it wall's not been like that. It's always been like that. The only thing we've done is we've had the chandelier cleaned. And I went, okay. And I looked at Craig and my partner, and he's looking at me with this look on his face as if to say, what the hell? That guy's insane. And we walked out, and I said to him, listen, last time we were here, and before I even finished my sentence, he turned around and he goes, that bloody reception was not like that. He said that wall was not there at all. You could see through into the dining room. He said it was those square bubble things that you put together and you make a wall out of. And I said, that's what I saw when we were last here. And he goes, that's what was here when we were last here. That guy's tripping. I said, hun, that guy's the manager. And I asked him how long he'd been here for, and he said like 8 years. And we went back to the car in complete silence. We got in the car. Nothing was said. And I said, last time we were here, there was a waiter running around really busy in the restaurant. He finishes my sentences. He said, with the white-tailed jacket and the white glove with the silver tray, holding it up above his shoulder. And I went, yes. Did you see him too? And he goes, yes, because he was working there. And I went, I don't know what's going on. I said, but I'm telling you, that reception was not like that when we were here last. So I went away, and I was doing something online, surfing, doing whatever, and I stumbled across the story of this woman who'd stayed there with her husband and had gone down for breakfast in the morning. And she was yakking to the waiter. And her husband turned around to her and said, who are you talking to? And she said, the waiter. And he goes, what waiter? There is no waiter. Now, the description she gave of the guy is exactly what Craig, my ex-partner, and I had seen. Identical. And she also mentioned the fact that he was rushing round the dining room with a tray above his shoulder. So, looking into and knowing about these types of things, the only thing that I can think that occurred is we somehow slipped in time, and what we were seeing was perhaps how the restaurant looked at some point in time, or maybe, hell, I don't know, maybe we slipped into another dimension, and maybe that was the hotel in another dimension. I don't know, but it was odd that we had never spoken about what we'd seen in reception. Why would we? We didn't think anything was... All I did comment on was how busy the waiter looked, and he just went, oh yeah, and, that was it, until we went back. But it was just interesting that without me doing any prompting, he finished my sentences saying what I was about to say and what we had seen, and it was identical.
And we're back again. I hope you enjoyed that little story. Not super scary, but still pretty eerie, I suppose, nonetheless. Thanks again to Tracy Royce for submitting that story. Should also note that Tracy is currently working on a book about all sorts of paranormal investigations and experiences around the country, and if you would like to pre-order that, all you have to do is send Tracy an email and let her know that you're interested in pre-ordering the book. You don't have to pay until the book is published, which is a pretty sweet deal. So the email address is tracyroyce1965@gmail.com. Just a note, Tracy has an E in it, so it's TRACEYROYCE 1965@gmail.com. I'm going to chuck a link to that in the show notes as well, so you can just click on that and send away. So now it's time for me to talk about something I alluded to in the previous volume of the Phantom Files. This was some in-person research that I did myself to an allegedly haunted location in my city of Christchurch. The location in question is known as the Dean's Bush or Dean's House. It's kind of used interchangeably. I suppose technically Dean's Bush is the land that it sits on, which is now like I don't know what the correct word is, a nature preserve. And the house is kind of the homestead that was built on the land back long ago when Europeans were sailing to New Zealand to establish colonies there. So I grew up in the sort of, this is very inside Christchurch, but I grew up in the Ilam, Riccarton, Sockburn kind of area. And that's right next to where the Riccarton Bush is situated still to this day. You can actually go along and see it, and I highly recommend you do if you're ever on holiday in Christchurch and you're interested in history and the ghosts. My first memory of hearing someone talk about the potential haunting, well, I suppose in general actually, the entire area, as long as I can remember, it's sort of just been accepted by the people of these kind of neighbourhoods that the house is haunted. And my first memory of hearing people telling stories about it was actually at a hairdresser. My brother and I were sitting at the hairdresser waiting to get our hair cut, and I think my mother had gone off to the mall or something to do some shopping while we were waiting. And I remember a man in the hairdresser, I think he was also getting his hair cut, he started talking about whether or not people had seen things, and they were talking about apparently someone had taken some photos that later got developed, and in these photos there were people that were not there at the time, and they were dressed in very old-fashioned clothing. He was even saying that in one of the photos, one of these ghost women was leaning over a balcony from upstairs and sort of holding a small dog, as if to kind of show it to the camera. But after actually having gone to this location, I don't know what balcony he was exactly talking about, so he might have been telling some tall tales there. But yeah, after living there for so long, I had been there on a couple of different occasions and gone for a walk in the actual bush area. It's quite a nice little peaceful walk that you can do in the middle of quite a busy area of the city. Riccarton, especially Riccarton Road, is very bustling and very busy, so it's quite cool that there's this like pretty much untouched little jungly bit right in the middle of it that you can walk around. But aside from that, I'd never been to the actual house before, so I thought, why not go and do some proper research there? And I sent an email to the admin, I suppose, of the trust that manages the day-to-day affairs of the house. And I basically said to them, hey, I'm a local podcaster. I'm interested in ghost stories. Is there a guide there or somebody who would be willing to maybe let me interview them or just tell some potentially paranormal experiences they've had? And then I also put at the end of the email, like, also, if you're sick of people asking about ghosts and you don't want to entertain that idea at all, then absolutely no worries, and I apologize for bothering you. And to my surprise, they actually didn't really mind. They were more than happy to talk with me about ghosts. They were even kind enough to arrange a tour with one of the guides who claims to be, I guess, spiritually sensitive is the correct way to say it. And I went along on this tour with the guide, and it was a fantastic tour. It's only $10, it's super cheap, and you learn a heap about the history of the area. I won't talk too much about the details of it because I don't want to necessarily give that information away for free. I'd like to encourage people to go along and actually take the tour. But in a nutshell, the two Deans brothers came over to New Zealand a few years before the Crown was sending the official ships over to colonise or to establish colonies in New Zealand. They were from Scotland originally, and they were quite clever guys. They studied to be lawyers, so they were quite good at finagling the law, and they used this to their advantage several times. They initially landed in the North Island trying to establish a couple of farms up there, but for various reasons these didn't work out, and they sort of finagled a deal with the Crown and ended up getting this land down in the South Island in Christchurch, which seems weird because nowadays we know Christchurch is being built on top of a big swamp, but I suppose it seemed fine for farming back in those days. I'm not entirely sure why, but maybe just because it was flat, they were like, yep, this'll do. And so they established this homestead here. It was a little bit of a farm, and they had, initially it was a small cottage, and then as the family grew and they hired more and more workers and servants and everything, the house got bigger and bigger, and it's quite a big sort of, I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a mansion, because it's not as sprawling as a mansion, but it has servants' quarters and places for the workers to sleep, and several bedrooms, and I think it's 2 or 3 stories tall. So it's a big house. And as the story goes, one of the brothers went back to Scotland to essentially marry a childhood sweetheart of his, Jane. And he had to go back because Jane didn't want to make the voyage on her own, which is fair, because back in those days it probably wasn't very safe for a lady unescorted to take this long, several months trip on a boat by herself. And the other brother had unfortunately passed away. His ship crashed. He was trying to go over to Australia to get some farming supplies, and his ship crashed, and he unfortunately passed away. And then as luck would have it, the brother that went back to Scotland to pick up his sweetheart got back, and then he got sick. So I can't remember exactly what the guide told me, but it was something like tuberculosis or pneumonia. It was something that he just never got better from, and he eventually passed away from it, like not long after getting back to New Zealand with his now wife Jane. So you can imagine what a situation this was for Jane. She leaves her hometown. I think she was relatively from a relatively wealthy family back in Scotland. She makes this this massive trip back over to New Zealand with her now husband, who then dies very soon after. And Jane kind of had a choice at this point. She could either go back and kind of live with her family again, or she could take over the homestead and try to make a go of it. And as it goes, she decided to make a go of it, and she became the matriarch of what ended up becoming quite a big family. And she did a really good job of it by the sound of it. She seems like she was a really switched on, like hard-working, determined lady. So rest in peace, Jane, wherever you are. I would have loved to have met you while you were alive. And so as you can imagine, because there's so much work that went into this homestead, that's kind of the logic as to why it's believed that there are spirits lingering around. There's never been anything malevolent. The generally accepted story goes that Jane's ghost hangs around just to keep an eye on the place. And so the guide told me several stories which I have been given permission to tell on the podcast and in any live shows, providing the fact that I don't give any information about the guide. So I mentioned this in the last episode. Please don't make any attempts to seek out this guide. Just enjoy the stories for what they are, and leave the guide to themselves. I don't know what it is. Leave the guide, leave them be. So the first story that the guide told me was apparently only several years after Jane had passed away. There was a nanny looking after a baby in a crib in one of the rooms, and the nanny was sitting down, just kind of, I guess, chilling. And this old woman walked into the room silently and just stood next to the crib and was looking down into the crib at the baby. She didn't say anything, and eventually the nanny kind of asked, "Can I help you?" And then without saying anything, the woman just turned back around and silently left the room again. So the nanny later on in the day was talking to one of the women who was in charge, who was I think maybe daughter or granddaughter, I think daughter of Jane. And she said, "Do we have any old women staying with us at the moment?" And the daughter said, "No, can you describe her?" So the nanny described what she'd seen, and Jane was a very slight woman. There was actually a pair of her gloves sitting in her bedroom that you can see on the tour, and they're very small and very petite. So that was what was described by the nanny. And the daughter just said, "Wow, that sounds a lot like Mum." You can actually go in on the tour and see Jane's office where she used to work. Apparently she was very organised and she kept records of everything, and you can actually see several of the documents. You can see the receipts for her, I guess what was her honeymoon, when her husband came to sort of escort her back from Scotland. I think they did a bit of tripping around, and you can see all the receipts for that in Jane's handwriting. And next to her desk, she had built a special window into the side of the house that wasn't really big enough for you to... Well, you could sort of clamber through if you needed to, but it wasn't big enough to comfortably get through. And she built that window in there so that she could pay her workers without having to either invite them into the house or having to go outside herself. And apparently, according to the guide, this window is constantly opening on its own. There is a latch, which people do up the latch, but it's always being opened, allegedly by the ghost of Jane. It's gotten to the point where they had to drill a hole in it and insert like a special rod to keep it closed, and through that they've managed to keep it shut for the most part. So the guide was telling me that they aren't able to communicate with the spirits. Well, even if they were, it was not something that they wanted to do, because I believe in the kind of lore it goes that once the spirits know that you can hear and see them, they don't leave you alone and they try to communicate with you. And so this guide was telling me that they acknowledge that they can sense them, and they said it was a bit like almost like an electrical frequency, kind of like chills going down their spine. And it was really weird because we'd be walking around through these rooms. It was just me and the guide. I basically got a private tour, which was fantastic. And we'd walk into a room and the guide would kind of look up or something and go, "Oh, there's somebody in here," which, sent chills down my spine as well. And so another story the guide told me was at the start, they had a piece in the tour, like a prepared piece, fact about one of the Dean's brothers that they used to tell people on the tour. And the guide said one time they were doing the tour and they said this fact about, I believe it was William, one of the brothers, and the guide said they could feel a kind of like zzz, 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 like as if almost like the spirit was kind of like jabbing them with their finger, if that makes sense. It kind of repeated, like the frequency would kind of buzz. And so the guide interpreted that as maybe the spirit was trying to correct them, maybe saying that's inaccurate or something they disagreed with, that kind of thing. And so the guide stopped saying it on the tour and the sensation stopped happening. Conversely, there was another part where in one of the brothers' rooms, I believe it was William again's room, there was a letter from, I don't remember who the letter was from, it was somebody kind of official, maybe it was to do with the Crown or the government, something like that. Because I'd been asking the guide throughout the tour, like, how were the Dean's family kind of seen by the rest of Christchurch? Because they all settled there first and they built this homestead up, so they'd obviously done quite well of it and they were quite wealthy. And so I wanted to know whether they were seen as kind of aristocracy or whether they were kind of embraced by the town. And the guide told me something quite funny, is the guide said that the Dean's family was somewhat separate from the rest of Christchurch, but it wasn't due to the fact of social class. It was actually due to religion. Now, I'm not super clued up on the different types of Christianity, I've also done a bit of searching, but I can't exactly remember what the split was, but I believe most people in Christchurch would have been Anglican Christians, as that was the Christchurch Cathedral was an Anglican church, and then the Dean's family were some, Protestant or Presbyterian. I don't know enough about religion to accurately say, but they were a different religion to the rest of the town, and for that reason, not actually due to the class divide, they were somewhat separate from the rest of Christchurch, but they weren't looked at negatively. And this letter that was in the brother's bedroom or office was actually saying thank you to the whichever dean brother it was for treating their workers well. Apparently they'd had favourable reviews from previous staff and workers and everything like that, which I think was quite rare at the time. And so the guide would have somebody on the tour read this out to one of the tours when they reached this room. And the guide told me they felt almost like arms wrap around them from behind, almost like a hug, and with this kind of staticky frequency, chills down your spine feeling that they got whenever they were feeling a spirit. So they interpreted that as kind of like the spirit saying thank you, or just showing some kind of appreciation for this letter being read out, and kind of acknowledged that the Dean's family, for what we can tell, they seem to be a relatively good group of people. The guide was also telling me about a time they wanted to bring a book home from the Dean's house to just have a bit of a read at home, and while the guide was reading, they said that they could feel a spirit sort of hovering over their shoulder, almost like the spirit maybe wanted to read the book as well. The only thing was, the spirit evidently followed them home when the spirit had seen that they took this book, because, you know, the spirit wanted to read the book, I suppose. And so the guide didn't want anything to do with that, and the guide brought it back and put it back where it was and turned it back to the page it was, and then just made a note to keep coming in and flick the pages forward every couple of days to give the spirit a bit of time to to read the book, which was quite a funny story, I thought. So now we're starting to get to some of the creepier stories about this place. It's an old house, it's made of wood, it's been redone and tidied up over the years, but one area that's still very creepy is the attic. Now initially, I'm a big lad, I'm broad, and I'm fat, so I only just managed to squeeze up the stairs. Another couple of Big Macs, and I might not have made it. And when you're actually up in the attic, I don't know what it is, but it's all wooden floors and wooden panels. It's kind of dark. There's these mysterious hatches and stuff everywhere, which were, I suppose, for maintenance, and there was sort of like a fire escape, that sort of thing that had been built into the attic. And there's all these old children's toys just lying around, and something about that just creeps me right the hell out. And now, as it's been this house is being managed by a trust, they've obviously done things to modernise it. Like they've put in a sprinkler system in case it catches on fire, and they've got motion sensors for security. You can probably see where I'm going with this. There are several rooms in the house where the motion sensors have to be switched off pretty much most of the time, because something keeps setting them off. The guide was telling me about a particular story. I guess maybe not long after they had just put the motion sensors into the house, something was setting off the motion sensors, so a security guard was dispatched to come and see what was happening. The guide described the guard as being a big tough guy with a gun and a German Shepherd, and for some reason the dog absolutely refused to enter the house. I think the security guard went inside, but also refused to go back in. So to this day, they're not quite sure what these two saw, but the way the guide put it, what could be so scary that a big strong man with a gun would refuse to go inside this house? So I've saved the best for last. But the final story the guide told me is a cracker. There was a particular room in the house that we went to. The guide did tell me whose it was, but I'm struggling to remember. I think it was one of the eventual daughters of the family's house. And as soon as we walked into the room, the guide shuddered and said to me, "This is the bad room." And in this room, there was a closet that had some dresses hanging in it from coat hangers. There was glass But the closet doors were open, but there was glass kind of in the closet doors, so you couldn't touch anything inside the closet. And apparently the two things would happen is the doors were constantly opening on their own, and then you could see almost like something was moving the coat hangers, and the dressers would kind of move as though someone was shaking the coat hangers. And apparently there was just a weird feeling in that room for ages, and the guide was telling me about one time they were locking up and they went to leave, and then they felt this incredibly strong presence kind of all of a sudden. And the guide said they felt like something was wrapping or draping fabric, almost like silk, around them in a spiral over their shoulders and their neck and their head. The guide said it wasn't suffocating or it wasn't pulling the fabric tight, but it just felt as though fabric was being draped and swirled around them. So as you can imagine, the guide wanted nothing to do with that. The guide screamed, ran outside. And then another different staff member, who also claimed to be spiritually sensitive, came into the room to see what happened. And this second guide said it felt like they walked headfirst into a wall of fabric or silk. And then after that, when they sort of managed to compose themselves and go back in, the guide pointed out an area above the closet in kind of the corner of the room where they said they could just feel this evil, very, very strong spiritual presence just lurking up in the corner of the room. And they didn't really know what to do, so the two guides kind of figured they had to do something about it. And the guide told me they contacted a local Maori, I can't remember the word the guide told me. I asked a friend of mine who said it might be a tohunga or kaumatua, but my friend said the most common word would probably be cultural advisor. I don't think it was necessarily like a shaman or anything like that, but it was somebody that was familiar with spirituality within New Zealand. And this person gave them some rituals to do, like, I think there's some, like, burning sage and all that sort of standard get rid of spirits thing. But they said the main thing that weakened the spirit was them just saying out loud to it, "You're not welcome here. It's time to leave. You need to go," that kind of thing. And the guide told me over the course of weeks, the spiritual energy just got weaker and weaker and weaker, and eventually it was gone. And the guy didn't say anything about feeling a presence when we entered that room on the day, but evidently they still had some bad memories or bad feelings about being in that room. So that was the result of my research going to the Riccarton House and Bush. I highly recommend you get out there and check it out. They've got a cafe and a restaurant in there. It's not really a spooky place during the daytime. The day I went, they were doing like a kids' story time thing, so there were little kids running around, and it wasn't very spooky at all. It was just a nice heritage building. And like I said, if you contact them and ask about the spiritual type stuff, they are happy to arrange a kind of a tour with guides that are, or people that have experienced spiritual stuff at the house. So our fourth tale coming up right now is another one from my podcast with David from the One Nothing podcast and Down the Rabbit Hole on Instagram. This one's a lot creepier than his other story about being mistaken for the devil, and it seems to be a genuine paranormal experience. He also talks about almost some like interdimensional multiverse theory type stuff, so it's a very interesting story. I enjoyed hearing David tell it, and I hope you do too, listening to it now. So let's roll the audio.
Yes, definitely. So, and there's a little backstory to this. Two things happened that day. Two very bizarre things happened that day. One is there was a fire in the apartment above mine. So I was on the first floor. There was a fire going off on the second floor. I had no idea, but it was blazing. And I'm sitting there on my chair watching TV. I had my dog Charlie. She's a little Chihuahua mix. She has her own Instagram account, by the way. She has over 3,000 followers, which is funny to me. So we're sitting there watching TV, and it was around 4-ish on a Sunday. I'll never forget this. And it was like towards the end of October, 20-something, right? So we're sitting there, and I'm really exhausted the day before. I don't know what I did, but I stayed up really, really late. I was really tired, and I thought, I'm going to take a nap. I should take a nap. It's like 4:30ish, and I'm thinking, the logical part of my brain is like, no, don't do that, because you work tomorrow morning, and if you take a nap now, you're going to screw up your whole night, and you're going to suffer tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. So I decided not to. And here's what's bizarre. So I don't know how you feel about, like, decisions you make. Like, you made the decision to be a comedian straight up, right? There's another universe where you didn't. You went to the left, and you didn't go to the right, where you are now, right? So what happened to that dude who didn't? What is he doing now, right? There was a decision I made not to take a nap. But I think in another universe, I decided to take a nap. And here's the bizarre shit about this, is that I have a memory. So there was glass breaking from upstairs, and the fire was raging out. I have a memory from when I was sleeping and waking up and hearing that glass break. They woke me up, and I just ignored it, went back to sleep. And I have a memory of hearing it while I was watching TV and going to see what was going on. Two distinct memories. The weird part about that, just to cut to the chase, is that when the firefighters got there, they told me that if you had stayed 10 more minutes in that place, you would have died. Smoke inhalation. It would have killed you for sure. So the dude that took a nap did not make it. Okay, so, and I have a lot of, I feel like something happened in that moment where I was either pushed to the side or just, I don't know, something really weird happened, because I have differences now from that point. There's some very distinct differences. For example, I had rheumatoid arthritis before. Really bad, to the point where at some points I couldn't even get out of bed. It hurt so badly that I couldn't walk. It was both in my hips, my knees, my ankles. I had costochondritis in my chest, sometimes my shoulder. It was horrendous. I could not. It didn't matter if I sat down, I laid down, I stood up. I was in pain. But when it would pass, when it would go away, I would feel better. When it was cold, that's when it hurt the most. When it was warm, I was all right. So after that date, that went away. It's gone. I don't have that anymore. Which I can't explain why I don't have that anymore. But I have not had it since then. But I have something in its place that I didn't have before. And it's called ankylosing spondylitis. So, you heard of that? Okay. So I was 5'7.5", close to 5'8", right? I'm 5'5" now. So how did I shrink? I don't know. But one of the explanations from my doctor is, from the condition that I have in my spine, it's basically the vertebrae are fusing together, and so it's like crushing out the discs, which it's shrinking me essentially. I didn't have that before. I never had that. Why do I have that now? It doesn't hurt, which is a bonus. The arthritis hurt like hell, dude. This doesn't hurt, but I miss being taller. I can tell the difference, like almost immediately. Like the curbs on the road, like the side when you step off a curb, it seems bigger for some reason. It seems like more of a chore than before. It's just like a step. It's like you're going down a step. It's no big deal. Now it's like, are they bigger? What the hell's going on? So many things like this happen. Okay, I can't explain it. I don't have any proof to prove to you this is what's going on. It's just what I think. I have something in the back of my neck that it was a little, like a thumbprint back here that I had afterwards, and I didn't know what it was. And I went to the doctors, and they were like, I don't know what it is. Let's take a test. It's inconclusive. They don't know what it is. So now, since that day to now, it is grown almost to the size of my hand back here. They still don't know what it is. It's just like hell. And I don't know what it's... Eventually it's going to take over my whole body. I don't know what's going on, man. I don't know what it is. And I need to go back because this thing is getting out of control. I didn't have that before, right? And it was like a mark, yeah. And I remember like touching it, and it felt like gills. It felt like these 3 lines across from up to bottom. And I was like, holy shit, am I becoming a fish? What is this? What is going on? It still has that consistency, but... I don't know, dude. It looks like a burn. It looks like a 3rd-degree burn is what it looks like. And the one other thing I'll tell you about what's happened since then to now is I remember the smell of the fire originally smelled to me like barbecue. And I live in Texas, right? So barbecue is normal here, and it's a way of life. And so I thought, oh, someone's barbecuing, okay, no big deal. Then I noticed it started to become like a little chemical smell to it, and that's when this man was like banging on the door, hey, there's a fire. And so I got out. To this day, almost daily, I can smell smoke, and it's that smoke that I smell. But it's like phantom, like there's no smoke anywhere, there's no fire anywhere. When it originally started, I would tell my girlfriend, like, hey, something's burning. We got to figure this out. And so I would run to the kitchen to see if the oven's on or if the stove is on. Nothing. There's a fire outside. It's just me. I smell it, and it bothers the hell out of me because now I'm used to it. I know it's not real, but it makes me wonder, like, if there's an actual fire, am I going to think it's fake? You know, am I going to think it's just in my head or something? So the second part of that, so that night I had nowhere to stay. And I was in the office of this apartment complex, and they were saying, we're going to get the Red Cross here. They're going to put you up at our hotel, this and that. I was like, cool. My sister called me and said, don't go to a hotel. Stay with me. I said, all right. I really wish I didn't, but I did. I went and stayed in her house. She had a guest bedroom. And this is where the experience came into play. And I think they're connected, Taylor. In some weird way, Taylor, excuse me. I think they're connected because I never really had an experience like this before. And so I go to her guest bedroom. She also there's a bed there. She has like crafts and stuff. It's her craft room also. Her and her son Max, my nephew, he was on 3 or 4 at the time. So I go in there, go to sleep. Me and Charlie are falling asleep, and then I start to hear a tap on the wall, like a 3 taps, 3 taps, and I'm like, what the hell is that? And I'm a skeptic by nature. I try to explain things away, and which is really bizarre when I'm deep in the paranormal. But I was like, what is causing this? There's a ceiling fan going. She's got papers like on the wall with a thumbtack, right? So I'm looking around and I hear it, and then I notice that like when the fan is going, one of the papers kind of comes out a little bit and taps itself on the wall. And so my brain's like, that's it. Good night. Go to sleep. Right? So as soon as I explained it, I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't worried that some ghost was tapping or whatever. So go to sleep, and that night, somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, someone is like, I'm sleeping on my right side, and my little dog is right here, and I feel a little hand grab my shoulder. And my sister is 5 foot. She's little, so I figured it was her waking me up, right? Like something's going on. And I feel her shaking me, and I'm waking up, and I still feel it. And I'm awake, and I look, and there's no one there. Shaking my arm, there's nothing there. And I look, the door is still closed and locked, and there's no one in the room. And it stops. And I'm fully awake, because that shouldn't be happening. What just happened, right? And then I heard what sounded like footsteps. But she had like a wood floor or whatever. And it sounded like someone was shuffling from in front of me to the other side of the bed with socks on. That's what it sounded like. Someone was shuffling around. And I was like, what the hell is that, dude? What? And as I'm saying that in my mind, as I'm experiencing this, like, trying to explain it in my head, I hear a little boy laugh from that direction. And let me tell you something. I'm a man. All right, Taylor? I'm a man. You know what I'm saying? And instantly I covered myself with my covers because I was like, I'm not dealing with this shit. No. Even Charlie was quiet. She was, I think, a little freaked out too. And I heard the shuffling a few more times, but I didn't hear the laughter anymore. And I don't know how long I was awake, but I was awake for quite some time trying to process what happened. Trying to figure out, is this my nephew? What is going on? No, the door is locked. He's not in here. What the fuck? And, I had such a trying day that eventually I fell asleep, which I was like, oh, this is interesting. You would think something like this would have you running to the hills, right? And you would, you know what I'm saying? But I didn't. I stayed there, and I actually fell asleep. Once it stopped, everything stopped. And the next morning, I go into the kitchen and to the table there, and I'm having coffee with my sister, and I said, I got to tell you something. Something weird happened to me last night. And she said, oh, you experienced it too? It's like, what? What do you mean? What? What are you talking about? You knew something was going on in there. You didn't tell me. She was like, yeah, Mom and Dad said they heard some weird stuff in there, and every once in a while when I'm in there, stuff will be knocked off the shelf, and I'll pick it up, I'll put it back on the shelf, and it'll be knocked down again. I can't explain what's going on in there, but something weird. And also, Max, her son, her 3-4-year-old son at the time, he has this imaginary friend, right? He calls him Coco. He's been talking. I hear him having conversations with him, and I'll walk in there, and I was, who are you talking to? Oh, I'm talking to Coco. So she thought, oh, it's an imaginary friend, obviously. But then Coco started to scare the shit out of Max, terrifying him. He would run screaming from the room, from whatever Coco showed him, you know. For the longest time, my poor nephew, we couldn't take him to like a Halloween shop or anything, because he would see those things, and he would freak out. He couldn't do it. You know, something happened in that house, man. I can't explain it. They no longer live there. It's bizarre, and I kind of want to go back and do some like investigations. That would be fun.
And we are back. What an interesting story that was, eh? If you want to hear me and David talking about that, I respond to his story and we throw some ideas back and forth about the idea of the multiverse and had we ended up in different parts of life if we'd made different choices and all that sort of thing. So just go back through the feed and listen to the episode. I can't remember the full title of it, but it's like 4D Creatures and something with David from One Nothing Podcast. Before I get on with the final story tonight, I'd like to also remind you that if you have a story you'd like me to play on this show, you're more than welcome to submit it. Just send it as a voice note off your cell phone to ruddlesphantomfiles@gmail.com. You can also send it as a written form, and I can get one of my comedian friends to record it, or I might do it myself. And if you really want to, we can do a Zoom chat, and I can sort of talk you through the story, and then I edit out all of my bits, so it sounds like you're telling one unbroken full story from start to finish. As always, any likes, shares, and subscribes are greatly appreciated. My podcast is beginning to chart in certain other areas of the world. I think we're charting in Ireland, Nepal, and New Zealand now. So shout out to all those Nepalese and Irish Ruddle Maniacs for helping keep the dream alive. So this final story on the show tonight is one of my own, actually. I recorded this a long time ago, and I kind of set it aside to use on a future episode of the Phantom Files and forgot about it. But I dug it up, and I think it's got a little bit of a twist ending that might leave you kind of surprised. So with that, let's roll the final tale of tonight's episode. Take it away, me.
Hello there, this is Taylor. This is a story that happened to me maybe a couple of years ago. I may have mentioned on the podcast before, but I am a stand-up comedian, and when you're doing okay at stand-up comedy, you get to travel every now and then, and this was a particularly short-notice road gig. I'm normally based in Christchurch, but there was I forget exactly how I got the gig. Quite often in stand-up comedy, you'll get gigs just based on the fact that you have a car, and my job was to drive myself and a comic with a bigger profile than myself down to Dunedin, and then back up again the next day, I believe. So these trips are usually a lot of fun. They're usually quite run and gun, and you normally get some good stories out of them. Now this particular story, there was a lot of unsettling things leading up to the climax, which we'll get to. We drove for about 5 hours from Christchurch to Dunedin, and when we arrived, it was a beautiful, dreary Dunedin day. I quite like Dunedin when it's raining. It feels very macabre. We got lost looking for our accommodation and ended up on some kind of one-way system or highway, I can't really remember, but we ended up next to a graveyard, and there's always something really sort of hauntingly beautiful about a graveyard on a misty, dreary day. So that was kind of spooky incident number one. We eventually found our accommodation, and once we got inside and checked in and everything, we noticed a few interesting things about all of the rooms. Every single room had at least one hand basin in it, and they had these really, really tall ceilings to the place. The room we were staying in was, I think, what one would refer to as a shoebox. It was only slightly big enough for 2 single beds, and then the 2 basins in the room, and then a little desk, and that was about as much space as we had. We got chatting to the guy who was behind the counter, and it turns out that this whole hostel actually used to be a hospital. So, I guess, in the process of converting from a hospital to a hostel, really all you got to do is take a few letters out of the sign, and Bob's your uncle, you've got yourself a new business. So with that knowledge, the place did feel a little bit creepier, because we started to imagine what sort of, surgeries and other kind of creepy goings-on must have happened in this place 100, 200 years ago. But the downstairs was really cozy. It had like a really nice sunroom with a pool table and some cozy chairs, and the kitchen was quite nice. One thing to note is that there was a sign in the kitchen saying no cooking after 10 p.m. This will be relevant later on. So at this point we were free to kind of do what we wanted until the show. He had to go do something else. I ended up doing my own thing. I think he was meeting a friend or something in the city to hang out for a little bit. I was just chilling out on my own. And the instruction was to meet at the theatre just before showtime. Now there was the headliner, there was another comic, and there was myself on the lineup, and I was the first to arrive at the theatre. So I say hello to all the staff. The owners were there, I believe. They welcomed me in, took me in through to the back room, and I kind of just sat on my own in the back room for a little bit. And this was kind of creepy experience number 2. Or I suppose you could consider the hospital to a hostel experience number 2, and this number 3. I don't know if you've ever been backstage in an old theatre. It's a feeling that I absolutely love, but it really creeps me out. They're always super cold, and you get this incredible sense of days gone by from all of the different things like posters from previous productions, pieces of costumes lying about, especially if they do a lot of period pieces. There's a lot of different costuming, the fabric on the chairs, etc. The whole thing just feels out of time slightly, combined with the fact that they quite often have pigeons or other birds roosting up in the rafters of the building, and are just generally old, creaky buildings where you can find just cables randomly coming out of the ground and such. I really like the experience, but it is a very eerie one being by yourself in the dressing room of an old theatre. So I kind of chilled out for a little bit by myself. The other opening act turned up, we said hello, eventually the headliner turned up, and we kind of proceeded to do the show. And the way the layout of the theatre was, there were actually 2 ways you could get to the main theatre room from the dressing room. You could exit out of one door and then go through kind of the main entrance that would be where the audience members enter. But there was also a back way where you exit another door, you turn right and there was a toilet, and if you turn left you would end up at the back of the theatre, and there was some curtains and cables and all sorts of... I didn't really want to go stumbling around there in the dark. But while I was on stage doing my performance, I swore that I could see somebody standing in the doorway, coming from that second way at the back of the audience. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I just kind of assumed it was the headliner checking the show out, did a little more of my act, looked back, and the person was gone. I couldn't really clearly make out any details. It was just kind of the silhouette of somebody standing, kind of leaning in the doorway. Finished my set and went backstage. I asked the headliner what he thought of my set, and he said to me, "Oh, I didn't catch it, sorry, I was in the bathroom." So that was creepy experience number 4. So the rest of the show went without incident. We ended up hanging out for a little bit, going out for drinks with the owners of the theatre. Stayed in this really, really cozy little Irish pub. Hung out there for a couple of hours, had a few drinks. Eventually the group kind of dissipates off as people have to leave, go home. Till eventually there was only a couple of us left. We all said our goodbyes and then walked. I remember I just about died walking uphill. I was so unfit then. So we got back to our accommodation. I turned in for the night, but the headliner was a bit of a night owl. He wanted to stay up and watch movies and stuff on his phone. I crashed pretty much immediately. I felt quite bad for him because I snore pretty aggressively. So I can't imagine. I imagine even if he wanted to get to sleep, he probably couldn't. And the final creepy experience of the evening happened at about 1 o'clock. I woke up with a super dry mouth. Felt like I needed to go to the bathroom and get a drink of water. And I didn't really trust the basins in our room. It just seemed like it wasn't water to drink from. So I kind of mumbled something to the headliner. I'm going for a drink. I got up, used the bathroom, and then went and found. We had cups in our room that we could use to. I think they were provided by the hostel. And I shuffled downstairs. I'm still quite sleepy, only kind of half awake at this point. The whole place is creaking and groaning as I walk around. It's not too spooky, but I don't do great in the dark. And then when I get to the first floor, I heard all this clanging and banging and commotion and carry on coming out of the kitchen. And it was the only room with the light on the first floor. And I thought to myself, that seems kind of suspicious. And in my half-asleep state, I honestly thought maybe the place was being robbed. Someone was stealing stuff from the kitchen or something like that. And so I crept up to the just shy of the doorway to the kitchen. There was no door, it was just like an archway. And I don't know really what I expected to do. I was kind of looking around to see if there was any kind of weapons or anything like that. But I was just holding my glass in my hand. And I just thought, alright, let's see what it is. And so I stepped into the light in the hallway coming from the kitchen. And I was greeted with what I later learned to be a Korean man who was cooking a full English breakfast at 1 in the morning. As you can imagine, all the tension disappeared from my body as soon as I saw this. I felt really silly for feeling so spooked at what was, of course, a pretty normal thing to happen in a hostel. I remember I walked in and he gave me the what's up nod, didn't say a word to me immediately. I later on had a little chat to him and kind of found out where he was from and everything. And I had to laugh to myself as in my vision I could see him with this like a hearty fry up. It was a heavy fry up. He was cooking sausages, eggs, bacon, like the full English breakfast at 1 in the morning. And then just in plain sight behind him a sign saying no cooking after 10 p.m. It was just such a funny juxtaposition. So we had a little bit of a chat. He was on holiday from Korea. Nice guy. I did point out the sign to him, but he gave zero fucks about the sign. Which, I mean, I don't know. It's a hostel. What do you expect? People are going to do weird things like that. So I went back to bed and ended up sleeping through the rest of the night, and we drove back to Christchurch the following day. I hope that wasn't too much of a bait and switch of a story for you. I hope the lead up to it was still delightfully creepy for you. But I guess what I wanted to achieve by telling this story is that even though I'm not all about the debunking and the discrediting of stories, sometimes these things are just silly little coincidences. I hope you enjoyed it.
And we are back again. I hope you enjoyed that final story, and I hope you don't feel too tricked or swindled by the fact that it was not paranormal at all. Just a guy making a breakfast at 1 in the morning in a hostel. Well, folks, that's going to bring us to the end of Volume 5 of the Phantom Files. I hope you've enjoyed it. And as always, please don't forget to leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, whatever you use. Any review helps the show a massive amount. And as you know, the more listeners I get, the more people that might submit their stories, and I might have enough material to make more episodes of the Phantom Files in the future. I know I say this every episode, but right now I only have one story that I haven't posted, but I do have several interviews lined up with some paranormal investigators who might be able to send me a story or an experience that they've gone through. So it might be several months. Hopefully it's not going to be a year like the gap between episode 3 and episode 4 was, but you never know. There's only so much I can do to drag these stories out of people. So for now, that's the end of the Phantom Files for a little while. I hope you'll keep listening to the podcast. I've got some great stuff coming up, and as always, I don't have a fancy sign-off. I don't have a cute thing to say to end the episodes, but stay safe, Phantom Files. That was the Phantom Files.
This has been a Tape Deck Media production. Thank you for listening.
Hey Ruddlers, I joined a group of podcasters that we are calling the Trailer Alliance, a group of podcasters that share each other's trailers at the end of the episodes and generally support each other. So at the end of each episode for the next few weeks, I'm going to be playing a trailer of one of the members of the Trailer Alliance. And here's one of them now. I hope you like it.
Are you struggling with a lack of access to captivating entertainment and media? Are you faced with constant judgment and ridicule from friends and family for your inability to respond appropriately to sensitive situations? If this sounds like you might be suffering from being emotionally dead inside. But it's not too late to make a change. One Nothing Podcast is a newly available treatment for being dead inside. Taken just once every 2 weeks, One Nothing could make a world of difference. By combining carefully measured dark humor to the amazing original formula of grisly fatalities, One Nothing Podcast has successfully entertained thousands of people suffering from death inside. And with access across all podcast platforms, treatment has never been more readily available. But don't trust my word. Here's some real-world testimonials from a few of our listeners currently undergoing treatment.
From consistent doses of One Nothing Podcast, my posture has greatly improved due to being kept on the edge of my seat.
The One Nothing Podcast comes on, everybody be like, shut the f*** up. I be quiet, but when the episode's over, I be talking again.
Oh my gosh, buddy. I used to be on so many medications for blood pressure, and then I listened to One Nothing Podcast's episode on Kitty Genovese, moved into an apartment on my own, and haven't needed it since. That one really got my blood pumping.
You know, listening to One Nothing Podcast, I'm not constipated anymore. I'm just full of shit.
So what's stopping you from great entertainment?
One Nothing Podcast is not intended for all audiences. Listeners under 18 years of age should obtain permission from your parent or guardian before downloading. Tell your therapist if you're predisposed to whining, complaining, reading podcasts poorly, being overall combative, or being easily offended, as One Nothing Podcast might not be right for you.
So stop letting great content pass you by. Talk to your therapist today to see if One Nothing Podcast is right for you.